Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Sebastian Reynolds and this is my podcast. And for this episode, I'm joined by Nico de Rooij. Nico is a friend of mine and a truly exceptional lighting designer and scenographer. He's worked on a whole range of absolutely amazing and diverse projects, working with some of the biggest names in the music business, Niels Fram, Oliver Arnolds, Efterklang, many more. He's worked for theatre, ballet, contemporary dance. We got to know each other from projects with Neon Dance, with Adrienne's company, Puzzle Creature and Mahajanika dance drama. So it was a really great conversation. I'm really grateful to Nico for coming on and talking about creativity and lighting and performance. I hope you enjoy the discussion. So Nico's made a couple of music videos for me for my track Mother's Day. We released a video in January. That's for my new EP, Nihilism is Pointless, out now on Faith and Industry. And Nico's also made a video for an old track of mine, Mildenhall, which was on the Solo Collective Part 2 record, where Solo Collective is the project I have with Anna Muller, the cellist, and Alex Stolzer, the violinist. That came out, I think that was June 2019. So Mildenhall, and I will have just shared the Mildenhall video as well. So when you're hearing this, both of those videos, Mother's Day and Mildenhall, will be available to stream on YouTube as well. So, in the comments box there'll be the website link for Nico's site, which I can't actually remember off the top of my head, but it'll be there. So, just thanks as always for listening in, and I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you again soon. Hello, Nico. How are you doing?
Hi, Mr. Reynolds. I'm good. Good to see you and to hear you. And thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you. Nice to see you. I always like to start with my guests just to encourage them to talk about who they are, where they're from, and then how they sort of connected with their art form. Like, how did you get into doing what you do? Go from there.
Well, it's really a natural flow. I did not do much for it. I was very fortunate to be born in a family full of musicians and performers and art lovers. My father is a concert pianist, and he has been playing in an orchestra that is playing for the Netherlands Dance Theatre and the National Ballet. And as it happens with youngsters, they go along with their father or their mother to their work. So every week I was sitting in the auditorium, seeing the newest contemporary dance performances you can imagine, from choreographers like Iri Kilian and Hans van Manen. And I always remember I was kind of carried away with what I saw, and always been put in these other worlds. And after the performances, I always had the chance to go backstage, and it was always very exciting, and there was a lot of adrenaline. So this was in the Netherlands. My grandmother was a violinist. My grandfather, who I unfortunately never got to know, was a jazz pianist in the Netherlands. He was playing with Coleman Hawkins and other great American jazz musicians that came after the war to the Netherlands. He was one of the first ones to record vinyls in the Netherlands. That gives you kind of a baggage as a young person, and automatically I wanted to do also something with performing arts. I thought instantly, but I also realized I was too curious in other things to be busy with it. So I was always kind of hanging between I was a great fan of Indiana Jones, for example, and history, and Desmond Morris, the sexual, the human zoo documentaries. So I was kind of divided a little bit. about these two things, performance art and social studies, let's call it like this. And by time I realized that keeping doing the practices in arts guaranteed me also the possibility to travel a lot and kind of to intertwine these two elements together. So actually, I'm not really doing work. I'm just experiencing stuff along the go of life, and I think arts is a great tool to experience life and experience questions, and that's kind of how it started for me. And I'm still doing that, like 20 years after finishing university.
Okay, so what did you study at university?
I decided I wanted to study cultural anthropology. Before that, I tried several performing art studies, like also acting and directing. I was playing music instruments, but then I thought, no, I'm going to break. I want to be an anthropologist. So I studied cultural anthropology, and while doing so, I actually started to make TV programs on a university TV broadcasting corporation, and then I stopped studying and I went back into the arts. But I learned a lot, and so I take what I learned with me and have a more empirical approach towards the studies these days.
Okay, very interesting.
Yeah.
So that's, I suppose, more like a sort of philosophical, creative sort of network in your mind in terms of your work as a lighting designer and scenographer, but from a more of a technical, because of course lighting design there's a lot of hard science involved and a lot of technical knowledge, a lot of engineering problems to solve. So that's quite an interesting. So even from the creative side, you have the influence from music events at a very young age, seeing large scale classical events and dance events and so on, and then thinking in this sort of philosophical kind of anthropological way. But then I suppose that's tipping into a scientific way. But what about the sort of engineering and the sort of more science-based aspect to what you do? Like, where do you think that came in? How did you get excited? If you already had that interest as well in technology and using equipment?
Well, at a very young age, I had this idea, okay, I don't want to work for one company or in one country. I want to work with as much different groups I can to see what I can do with light, how they work with it, how they perceive it, and how the audience reacts on it. So actually, by doing so, and I think the first project I did as a youngster was in Russia for a small dance company. Creating light there had a completely different vibe and also a different perception by the audience and by the makers than if I would make a performance in the Netherlands. So I realized, hey, that's interesting. There's something with light, and people in different social structures react differently to it. And I found that very intriguing. And I've been researching a lot about how people see colors, and we all know the stories that people who live in green environments can define much more different greens than we, for example, in the West can. And I was curious, okay, from a technical point, where does that come from? But then you really have to go into more almost medical studies, I would say. But I realized that color perception and light perception is very much cultural based. And that starts already when you are in Spain, for example, in the evening, and you look into the windows and you see people's houses. There's this, most of the time, a very white, bright light. Let's say in Mediterranean countries. If you walk around in the evening in England in the streets and you look in some houses, it's much more warmer, the color temperature. So it starts already at a very fundamental point. And I am still looking for this translation. Okay, what's the science behind this when it comes to the performing arts? How people perceive color and light angles, and what does it cultural mean to them? It's very intriguing. It's a beautiful thing to do, but an answer is still not really there.
That's fascinating. I suppose it's a bit like how Eskimos have dozens and dozens of words for snow.
Yeah,
They have all of these different like nuances in terms of snow, but most places, if they have snow at all, like in the UK, we have it maybe once or twice a year for a couple of days here and there. So we have sleet and snow. We have two words really. But
absolutely. Yeah, I guess it has to do with a form of awareness and sensitivity in the details of what light is doing on surfaces and how it's reflecting, which creates these different perceptions, how people react to different moods. I mean, the greatest audience I ever experienced was a tour I did in clinics and houses where mental disabled people were living. To see how they react on light is unbelievable. It's so intense. The slightest change in light brings a very loud crowd. Can be very small. So there is something in us that makes us really respond to the change of light. And light is a very interesting medium to work with in performing arts. It's not, most of the time it's not, people are not so aware of it, but it's a kind of unconsciousness mood management you can create. And I love this subtle add-on that I can bring in it, and keeps me doing it, and it keeps me fascinating every time I create a difference in the percentage or angle or color.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I mean, there's something I've been listening to recently. There's a neuroscientist in the US called Andrew Huberman, and he's one of the things that I'm aware of because of him is the science around red light exposure and seeing the sun in the morning and in the evening, and what a powerful therapeutic tool it actually is in terms of if you see the sun as it's rising and you experience it, and even there's studies to suggest that you have it on your body. So if you can be naked and it actually touch your body, including as a man, your testicles, it can actually have powerful therapeutic benefits. Like in the morning, it will reset your circadian rhythm for the whole 24-hour period, which is tremendously important for a whole range. Like every single cell is governed by this sort of circadian cycle. And that like there's actually therapeutic technologies you can buy, these sort of red light, maybe you know more about this, these sort of red light exposure systems where you can, if you're especially in the northern hemisphere, and if you're unlucky where there's not much daylight and there's not much, you can't see the sun in the morning and the evening when it's setting or rising, that you can sort of have a hack on it. You can at least get some of the positive effects. And also from an opposite perspective, is you can probably talk about this issue of blue light and blue light exposure, and how like experiencing blue light in nighttime hours can be tremendously disruptive and have a really like scientifically measurable negative effect on your sleep quality. Absolutely. And all of these things. So I think light ultimately is about our relationship to the sun and our body's sort of inbuilt response mechanisms to that. And I think there's more and more is becoming understood about that sort of area.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's fascinating to see how humans try to extract everything and also light and like this prisma approach where these three prime colors are being studied separately. It's an amazing achievement of the human mankind to be busy with that. I mean, there are studies, for example, where people are placed in a completely red room without any time or any watch. And apparently, if they're in there for an hour, they perceive time as if it is 45 minutes. So time goes much more faster when you're in a completely red room. When you're in a completely blue room, people perceive time goes much more slower. So it's like 1 hour and 15 minutes. So it tells something. Also, if you look at the frequency of light, the waves of colors, how that's responding to the human experience, it's definitely something which is super interesting to bring in performance art. But what I do in general, I mean, I really was working a long time with a very prime color, so a blue stage, green stage, red stage, which goes a bit back to the Goethe color studies. And over the last decades, I really am working on a kind of homeopathic approach of color. So when I work in live settings or in performances, I try to bring a little bit of blue, little bit of red, but always in a very pastelic form. But my idea is that people have the possibility themselves to think the color or feel the color that comes with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, fascinating. I mean, there's, of course, culturally and in terms of spirituality, there's so much powerful association, cultural association with colors and mood and so on. And, in the Eastern traditions and meditation, taking different colors as meditation objects and how that will affect your mood state and your psychological being and your physical being. So I feel like when you're working, are you very consciously thinking about the themes of what you're working on and the color scheme, or is there an element where you let your subconscious work as well, or?
It's very subconsciousness based. There is not much theory. It really is something that goes by feeling. And I mean, there's always kind of the classic ideas like red color schemes are more related to a passionate, more bombastic, intensified moment on a stage or in a movie. Blue is like the blues, so there always are these key things where you can fall back on. But I'm not thinking about it anymore. If I hear music, and I think that's also is because I was listening so much to classical music and jazz music, there's automatically a color or a light response somewhere coming from that lets me fill in what is needed. And funny enough, most of the time, if I do a concert or a tour, also in the music, the following order of music, there is always a translation I can make between, for example, a more up-tempo song and the next song is more down-tempo. It always goes from complementary endings somehow. There's always this kind of a clock that is ticking and make these differences. It's that automatically happens. So it's a very intuitive thing, I think. Yeah. There is no real science behind it anymore, or like a technical thing. I mean, I love to embrace accidents, for example, and also to work against that idea. I think it's always nice to bring in a very abstract way questions to the audience to do the opposing thing of what the audience is expecting.
I mean, I suppose I was actually thinking about it, and maybe it would be good to get into more, rather than the sort of more abstract conceptual side of it, more into the some of the specific projects. I mean, your resume is amazing. It's a really incredible list of artists, Nils Fram, Oliver Arnolds, Efterklang, all these guys, and then work for Punch Drunk and Secret Cinema and outdoor festivals all over the world. Or it just is an amazing sort of list of, and it's a diversity as well of these completely different kinds of projects working on dance and theatre, large scale through to really small scale stuff in theatres in really rough places like Pristina in Kosovo, and just that sort of breadth of experience of working in different contexts and, like you say, in different cultural contexts as well. I mean, it would be good to talk through a few of the different projects, but the first one I was going to talk about actually was the one we met with, which was we were working together for Neon Dance on Puzzle Creature. And if people don't know, people listening haven't seen it, so that's a contemporary dance piece, which is sort of a performance within an installation almost. So it's a very large, there's a few different sizes, but in Japan we were using the 20 meter by 20 meter dome. It's like a plastic bubble. And then there are these artifacts, these body molds hanging. And then the first part of the performance would take place within this sort of plastic dome. And then, I don't want to spoil it too much, but there's part of the performance that happens outside of the dome as well. And I mean, with that one, it was sort of like the combination of an installation and an immersive experience. So having people actually within the scenography. And do you want to talk a bit about working on that? And we worked together. Obviously, I was doing the music design and thinking about the scenes, and obviously we were influenced. Adrienne, the director of Neon Dance, was taking on inspiration from the Japanese-American artist-architect duo Arakawa Madeline Gins, who had an artistic statement of not dying. Basically, we have decided not to die, and this whole sort of philosophy and artist manifesto around that. And what for you was most interesting about Puzzle Creature and about working on that project in particular?
Well, I think it's interesting to look at the context of the idea of how people perceive or see performances these days. I mean, I sense there's a big tendency for people to just not look at a performance or look at a cinema or a movie, but people tend to have the desire to be really part of a performance or a movie. And you see that also back in the gaming industry with virtual reality and techniques like that there is a tendency of being part of something. And I think that working on Puzzle Creatures with the whole creative team, also visioning this idea of being part of something and looking at something and to play with that was the most interesting thing for me to work with in this case, in the context of I decided not to die, as you were saying before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose it's a very hard thing to sort of put into words in a way, the experience of being within that space. And the thing actually that's I thought of recently that sort of reminded me of Puzzle Creature, and I don't know which came first, but I think I experienced Puzzle Creature before I experienced is the film. I can't remember who directed it. We watched it the other night. Arrival, with the score by Johan Johansson. There's something about this sort of transformative kind of atmosphere, the sort of alien world that's created. It's intensely human, and I think for the audience this opportunity, and I suppose it does happen, but I'm not aware of too many other examples of dance where the audience is part of the scenography. So when you come into the dome as an audience member, you can sit or stand anywhere within the space, and then the dancers have to sort of refine or adapt the choreography based on where people are sat. So the behavior of the audience is actually directly influencing the performance. So there's a synergistic kind of relationship between the audience and the performers, and of course, that's not to understate the fact that that's always the case. You know, in any live performance, there's always the collective consciousness that exists between an audience, a performer, and the team, like whether it's the sound engineer, the lighting designer, or whatever. Like, there's always this sort of group process that's happening. And actually, that was I was going to come on to mention next is one of another artist that you work for, Niels Fram. And you've said to me before, I think, and correct me if I've remembered wrong, but that Niels has a tendency to sort of improvise and to make changes in the moment and to go off on these sort of, I don't want to say tangents, but just to explore different moods. And he's always playing the room and reacting, and that you're very much on that journey with him in terms of just going with what's happening. Is that correct?
To a certain degree, absolutely. I think for every musician that I work with, this is the case, and that's also really why I like to work with musicians that work in that way, to really let the space around them work for them. And I think in the case with Niels, he can be so focused on each piece and work on the same pieces really in details, that he, I think, I mean, I'm not him, but I really enjoy and have the feeling that he likes to work on very small themes within an existing frame to optimize and to bring a synergy with the space and the audience where he's playing for. Absolutely, yeah.
And I suppose with him, because, well, the tour that I saw, I think it's All Melody tour at the Barbican. I think it was the Barbican or the South Bank, and obviously he was performing. He has his whole incredible setup of technology, but he's performing as solo. It's just him on stage. So I suppose that also enables him to have that freedom to just go, you know, to take an idea in the moment and to just go and not be sort of reliant on a collective consciousness in terms of a band setup or like a group of musicians. Because of course you can have musicians who are very spontaneous and can work very well improvising together, but there's always sort of limitations in one way. In another way, that provides its own kind of tension. But I suppose, and also thinking about like Niels being a solo performer, and then someone like Olafur and his music so much is about this sort of intimacy and beauty and simplicity. There must be an interesting challenge for you as a lighting designer with them performing on these massive stages, but still trying to create a sentiment or like a feeling of intimacy, and it being very personal between Olafur or Niels and the audience. Do you have a feeling of that trying to create a sense of intimacy and close connection?
Absolutely, and it's funny that you mentioned it. I mean, especially with those two, they're so sensitive for what's happening around them, and I have constantly the feeling when I'm in the auditorium and creating lights for them that I have a dialogue with them. I react on them, they react on me, and the dynamics they have, I respond to or I go against to, and it seems like there is a constant dialogue of energy communicating to hold certain tensed moments. I mean, I can hear it sometimes back in the way how they attack their keys, where I can think of, okay, this direction we go today. And when that fits and when it comes together, you can sense, okay, the audience gets it too, and then you hear or you see it back on the way the audience is reacting. That's the magic that you have. So these moments of improvisations are for me always the magic moments. Something you cannot describe really in words. I mean, you have all the techniques, but it are these moments of improvisations and happy accidents that bring the spontaneous element to performance. And I think that's for me, most of the time, the strongest element of attending something or be part as an audience of something that I experience. And in that way, it's the same as with puzzle creatures, where there is such a space outside of the given space where the audience is in, that everything that vibrates sound-wise, light-wise, or dance-wise, the synergy between all these elements based on a fundamental fundament or a directed setting, but all these little mini subtle improvisations can be very little, like it can be for a dancer that moves the hands a little bit more out. It can be for the musician that attacks the note a little bit different, and how the light reacts. These synergies, that is what creates art for me, and that's in the moment.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, I completely relate to that. As a musician and a performer, you know, there's the sort of transcendental power of those moments of experience where everything comes together on this sort of knife edge moment, and it's I mean, maybe you also realize a lot of times when you try to reproduce the same thing the next day of what happened, because you managed to capture it and talk about it after the performance, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I think the element of space and the momentum is a key element in that. Yeah, the mystery of experience. I mean, it's something I was thinking about as well with this, the sort of work that you're doing, and thinking from a like cultural history and religious tradition point of view, that there's, you know, it's not these, you know, the sort of the dynamic of the performance arts venue, like whether it's Berghain or Sydney Opera House or the Royal Albert Hall, or wherever it might be, these sort of large, sort of awe-inspiring spaces have such an obvious sort of connection with cathedrals and large-scale places of worship. And it's like, whether it is St. Paul's Cathedral or, you know, Berghain or the Barbican Centre or whatever, there's this, you know, the power that comes from bringing together a large number of people with this shared devotional feeling towards something. It's like the willingness, the openness to have an experience. And, you know, in cathedrals, you'd have the church organ and the stained glass. And now we have like Nils Fram's music and your lighting. But it's still trying to create these sort of transcendent moments of awe. And it's I just saw that sort of relationship is quite interesting. Did you have sort of, as well as your experiences of coming to classical concerts and so on, and obviously there have been, as well as the liturgical settings like church settings and services and so on, there's also been large-scale classical performances for many years. But did you have sort of experiences in churches, in cathedrals and so on that have also contributed to this interest in awe, in just creating awe basically in people?
Yeah, with some concert I did in churches, and funny enough, more and more churches are devoted to music concerts, as especially in the West, where Christianity is kind of on its return. So there's a lot of space for music. It seems like music concerts are taking over slowly the church sessions you have on every Sunday, and I think it's a perfect metaphor of bringing the idea of being together, believing I have a problem with in general, and to believe in something, but at least to believe that you are together as a group, transcending in an energy that's circling in that space, in that skeleton. Because for me, the house of God or a church It's just it's a human translation of religion, but that there are space, and you see that, for example, in Africa, in tribal communities where people together under a tree, or in Japan where the tree is also very important, is for me the same thing. I mean, the acoustic of a church, of course, is a great technique of having this echoey vibe of transcending together. And I think it needs more personal attention when you're open air somewhere in Africa under a tree, and there is a lot of music going on there. It has a different vibe. Then you're really expected to use your individual magic to float on that beam that's been brought by the instruments or the setting. Do you know what I mean with that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have I feel like that. In fact, it's quite interesting because Adrienne, my partner, so Adrienne Hart, who runs Neon Dance, she's starting to develop her next dance work. Her next sort of project is the Prehension Blooms, and one of the sort of themes from it, or within the performance, is going to be this idea of loneliness and oneliness. And it's this idea that before the Enlightenment, we didn't really, that the word loneliness didn't exist in the English language, and that people would describe this state of oneliness. So, because obviously with Nietzsche, there was this thing about the death of God, and people sort of starting to lose faith in the idea of the monotheistic or omniscient being, the creator. And but before, one of the downsides was that meant people experience loneliness and separation in a way that they hadn't before, when they had, for the most part, a faith in a transcendent power that wasn't even questioned. Like, there wasn't really the linguistic framework even to question whether it existed or not. It would be like that, like, we don't have the language to really go into detail about the idea that the sky isn't there, because the sky is just there. It's just that's what it is. And so there are like pluses and minuses to everything. And of course, it's very easy to look at all the downsides of a sort of organized religious tradition of any kind, any of the big ones. You can pick them: Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, all of them, Hinduism. You know, they have their like reprehensible, horrible sides, and then they have the beauty and the truth and the power of transcendence. And it's a lot of the differences are really semantic, and that actually, like, so often you have these big arguments and disagreements between philosophers, or like, you know, people that are like avowed atheists, and then people that are very devoutly religious, like religious figures and so on. And when I hear that stuff, I almost hear like they're talking past each other because they haven't properly defined the terms. And that, like, Buddhism, you know, has this idea of karma and interrelatedness, and that like you have this karmic sort of load that you're carrying from life to life, and that all of this, like all these relationships and things happening purely because of this sort of interrelated flow of existence. And a Christian person, like, if something happened, a Christian person would say, oh, that was God. But then a Buddhist person would say, oh, that was a result of karma. But it's the same, they're referring to the same phenomena with different words. Absolutely. So, and I feel like whether it's 4,000 people coming to see Oliver at the Albert Hall and having this like magical transcendent experience, communing and sort of acknowledging divinity in a way, acknowledging the divine and the transcendent, it's not really any different to people going to St. Peter's and having this sort of collective experience of awe. Like, the differences are in some ways semantic, because this sort of abstract stuff is so difficult to really, there's so much cultural baggage around the language. So even people within the same sort of culture and with the same language, there's still language barriers because people might mean different things by the same words. I was going to bring us on. So another project that we worked on together was my project, which we worked on with Neon Dance, called Mahajanika Dance Drama, which was the project with Thai dancers and Thai dancer Pishet Klunchan and musicians Pradit Sayankrai and Great Lukaku, and then myself involved in the music as well, and dancers from Adrienne's company or working for Adrienne's company. And there's an interesting perspective from a cultural and anthropological perspective, the idea of sort of magic and ritual and the ritual of theatre and how you're sort of invoking spirits and so on. I mean, I think it's a case, I should have double checked this before we started talking, but certainly in some Asian countries, and I think I need to double check, but I believe it's the case in Thailand, and it certainly is the case in Indonesia, where they'll do performances of the Hindu epic, the Ramayana, and they actually, in the villages, they'll perform them for a whole week, and the audience will sort of come and go, the villagers will come and go, the performers and the musicians will be coming in shifts, and the actual audience for the performance is the gods. So they do these performances for the gods themselves, and then the audiences almost like come and bear witness to that. And that's a really sort of fascinating perspective on, because of course in this country and in Europe, the tradition was often there'd be royals would be present for the big scale performances, and they would sort of, that would have that element because of course there's the tradition, the legacy of the fact that the royal families, and it's certainly the case still in Thailand and in a lot of countries where people believe that the royal families are representatives of the gods. They are actually not, they're beyond human. They're not mere mortal humans.
Yeah. But if you look at the more ancient times in Europe, if you go, for example, to the Greeks and also pagan tribes, I mean, the first form of theater was really an exhibit and an inside look in the gods. I mean, the first Greek pieces played in the old amphitheaters were really for the audience to have a look in the life of the gods. The gods were represented there as well, and I have sometimes the feeling it are the royals and it are the people in power or the Christians that try to make that their own. I think a lot is lost in our society in the West, where as in Thailand, for example, or other Buddhistic countries, the tradition of celebrating the gods is still very present.
Yeah.
Fortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, like I said, but there's sort of some of these issues are also to do with language and linguistics in terms of trying to express these transcendent experiences. But yeah, there's another artist that you've have a long-standing working relationship with that I wanted to bring up and ask you about is Efterklang. And of course, they've had a fascinating career, and they've done these sort of opera performances and so on. What's it been like working with them over a long period of time and really developing a relationship, especially as they're doing sort of theatrically led work as well as the more traditional sort of band performance stuff?
Well, I mean, the nice thing with them is I really can consider them as friends. It's not per se a working relationship. It's something that it just happened actually by accident. I was working with Oliver, with my partner at the time, and still is Stuart, and we saw Efterklang playing before Oliver Arnold's, and I loved their music and the way they brought sounds into the auditorium, and I could relate to that because initially I've been working on dance and theater performances. And music was really like a second thing I did. I liked to light music groups that had a kind of music that kind of was how to mention it, not too obvious and very floaty and with a lot of layers, very ambientic. And I could see that the way of lighting that I do in contemporary dance worked also with them. And at that time, Oliver Arnolds and Efterklang, and it's like half 2000, so 2006 around it. It was quite a niche at that time. So it was basically really joining them because they were cool guys, super nice, and I could relate to their music. And we asked if we could come along. So we started and played in all kinds of places all over the world, and it was a beautiful thing to be part of their last 15 years, roughly. And they're great musicians. I mean, it's very rare that you meet people that work together so long and are also a bit different. And each musician in that group has their own quality, and that makes them so strong. And that's really nice to observe that and be part of that, and to assist in the visual aspects of their performances. And they're very open for ideas and experiments, and that's what I really like to do with them, to experiment. I mean, every concert we do is in that sense an experiment.
Interesting, yeah. And with sort of moving on with, by contrast, you mentioned in this biog and that you've worked with some really interesting theatres, places in Eastern Europe, like in Pristina in Kosovo, and these stories you have of being in these places. I think Adrienne mentioned that weren't you in Pristina not long after the war? And
that's correct, yeah.
Yeah, do you want to talk a bit about that and that experience of working somewhere that's so raw?
Yeah, well, it's interesting to look at the historical context. I mean, Pristina has been part of the Yugoslavian Empire, let's call it like this, for a long time. And after their independence war, they had this theater, of course, this kind of Tito, bit Russian architect kind of theater where everything was not in the best state, and they wanted to make theater there, and I got offered to be part of their first performances after the war, to create something there, and that was for me an opportunity to see how people work on theater there, so the technicians and the directors, but also the cleaning ladies, and to see how the audience is curious about theater and how it's perceived. And that was an amazing experience, because in the one hand you have the feeling, oh, I'm somewhere in an ancient way of thinking how theater should be made. And in the other hand, I also sense like, okay, let's try something completely new. We are independent now. We decide for ourselves. So the interesting thing is to work with people that step over their insecurities of what is and what should theater be, especially because it was called the National Theater. It's not an independent theater or anything. And after the war, there were a lot of people working for the theater that were really open for experiment and for new ways of making theater, as we see, for example, also with tendencies of how theater should be made these days. Like we were talking about the immersive kind of theater way of making. So you see also there this tendency that people are open for experiment and improvisations and try to embrace that, and people try to get loose of kind of structures that decide for them how things should be. People try to let go of that. What you see there, a lot of old traditional pieces are being used as a theme, like the Skandenberg. It's a war hero.
Okay.
In Pristina. So there are pieces that are related about this theme, but then put into a new contemporary presentation. For example, with abstract and modern sceneries. I mean, there was a big tradition in Kosovo of having a stage completely dressed up with curtains, everything, and nice and a dreamy world. And I realized what is more interesting is to break everything open and show the honesty of the space and do a classical piece in a surrounding like that. Because then you show the current state of something and you don't wind everything around it, and you give people the opportunity to get a kind of technical insight behind the stage. So in what space are we here? Yes, we are in a just independent country. This is our space. This is our naked space. Let's start to dress it up from there, like be honest. Be honest when you make a piece was for me something I really tried to promote there. Also in the way of acting. I mean, to act as yourself is apparently, I think, sometimes more difficult than acting a role for some actors. And was for me nice to work with people that had that desire and as well to promote that.
That's fascinating. There's a couple of separate sort of strands that I sort of draw out of that. There's, on the one hand, there's something that I've talked about before on the podcast, and it is that one of the areas of music that, and me and you have discussed as well, is the European postmodernist sort of modernism classical movement. So with the great composers, some of my biggest influences, Stockhausen, Xenakis, Nono, Messiaen, all these guys. And like you say, there's something about that, and you can see it on a cultural, like on a national or international level, when there's been that collective experience of trauma and grief and pain, and the sort of painful birth, and it can have this sort of rebirth quality where people, like Stockhausen has famously made this quote that he wanted to stop using regular rhythms because they reminded him of the march of the Nazi jackboots. And a hell of a lot of the innovation that came out of that post-Second World War movement was in this sort of the simultaneous horror of what had just happened, and then the sort of freedom of being released from that situation, and feeling like you could you wanted to tear up the rule book, you wanted to distance yourself from the past and anything that represented the old world order, and try and find something new. And this sort of new, in all that you think of Le Corbusier and all of the architectural things that happened after the Second World War, like literally physically rebuilding Europe, and thinking in this very sort of utopian way of creating a new language, whether it's in architecture or music or dance or whatever it might be. And often you have that for individuals as well. So you have that, something like that on this massive international scale across all forms of art. But then also at a personal level, sometimes people will go through, and I talk about from an autobiographic point of view myself, of having been through quite extreme trauma personally, like a traumatic experience. There's again this sense of learning from the experience, but wanting to look forward and wanting to sort of be reborn through that process. So it's interesting. And then the other side was circling back to Mahajanika dance drama and the way that we worked with Pishet and the musicians, thinking about Thai traditional music and dance and performance, and working out what was acceptable and not acceptable in terms of playing with the forms and the traditions. And there's always that sort of question about exploring these different forms, isn't there?
Absolutely. I mean, in that sense, for me, it was wonderful to work with styles in general and with forms. It's very depending on each culture. So why would I make something in the West with the idea it has to be according what I learned and what I know? You should never be a missionary person of the cultural background you're from, in the sense of the art that you learned or that you are familiar with. Who are you to promote an artistic idea in a cultural setting wherever you are as the truth or as the way it should be? And that's a difficult thing. And I think the only way to justify what you're doing in that sense is to show and give the audience the opportunity of all these forms and make people aware that there are different forms and different realities in the way you present and you create art.
Yeah, absolutely. And also remembering that, like, these sorts of like false distinctions in terms of like we have a tendency, and it's partly to do with a sort of capitalist thing of like wanting to commodify and sell things. Like it's helpful to go into a shop and get a can of soup and know that it's a can of soup. But like from a cultural point of view, we have this idea that you can put a neat box around things, and okay, that's that. And with Thai traditional, like the pipa or the court dance and music performances have a lot of influence actually from ballet. They had the Thai royal family had a really close relationship with the French royal family in the 1800s. So there was a lot of importing of costume and even dance moves, and some of the concepts behind ballet actually influenced Thai. What to us now would appear tremendously like very Thai and very like separate from our own culture. But when you actually start to understand the details, you can see this influence and this crossover and this conversation that's already been happening for hundreds of years between the Thai court music and then the music that would have been popular in the French court.
Yeah.
So I believe it was the 1800s, but we'd have to fact check that. So, and yeah, it's
Hello?
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to gather my thoughts. I was getting all excited. So was there anything else that you found particularly interesting about the Mahajanika? That we were presenting this old Buddhist sort of traditional folk story, originally from India, but that's very popular in Thailand, and something about like creating this sacred space.
Yeah.
Within these different contexts.
I really enjoyed the silence in it, and the silence in the scenes, the almost slow motion moments of the dancers and music, where I had the feeling like time is standing still now in the stories, and that was there was this amazing dynamic of energy and stillness in it, and I found the stillness when it comes to me the most strong. It was the most dynamic part in that sense. So I think that was a really great achievement, that it was possible to reverse these concepts of, in the one hand, when music gets loud, there's a lot of dance movement, there's a lot of light, that is actually was the entrance for the moments where it got still and where you felt that resonance trembling very strong. I found it very, very intriguing that to see that working so well.
Yeah, because it's the story is kind of representative of a sort of spiritual journey, and there's a bit of a Jungian kind of the hero's journey thing going on with it, and but also it's very much actually about meditation and developing the like meditation states. So it's that, again, like we've talked about before, this trying to express almost the inexpressible. Like, how do you express silence? Like you say, how do you actually communicate that feeling? And it's something that we tried to do, certainly with Mahajanika.
Yeah, and that worked very well. And then it's also interesting to see the different spaces where you do it. Huh? Like there was one performance in the National Library in London. A very fitting space to do it, and then the resonance of the whole room that's adding up to the mood, and you feel very little in this huge space. And then with the music and the dance, it just gets bigger and it's expanding. It's not. It was a nice connection between the space and the piece there. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Absolutely. So
because it's always challenging to work a piece in a very dominating setting. Like I think one of the misconceptions is that people try too much to take over a space, but you should always let a space work for you and respect and accept it as it is. Otherwise, a performance doesn't work. I've never seen it working.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like we were talking about with Nils and with any great artist, you always play the room. You always have to. Yeah, and the room plays the act as well. You're a guest in a space, and you should always. I mean, one time I'm in the Sydney Opera House, and the next month I'm in Uncle Tom's hut in Soweto working on a piece on transgender and LGBTQ community, and in the end, it's the same thing. It's just working the space and make a synergy so everybody feels at home in that space and with what's brought there. Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to come into. There's a couple more topics I want to cover before we close. So one thing that I've talked about, I think, with all of my other guests so far, and we've had musicians, we also had a photographer, and now you're the first sort of scenographer and lighting designer. But it's this sort of dynamic that technology has evolved so quickly, so rapidly in the 20th century. And obviously from a music point of view, the technology is incredible compared to what we had 100 years ago, 150 years ago, in terms of like, home recording equipment that's affordable, that's tremendously powerful, and you can produce stuff to the highest level pretty much. And all of the potential of that and all of the sounds that you have, it's just this Cambrian explosion of possibilities in terms of music making. And of course, that's expressed as well in music performance. And then, of course, in lighting design and in that sort of context, we have I was going to mention the drone animation systems that they have. They've been stuff on YouTube you can see from China and other places, and it's like, and we've talked about as well. There's on the other side, there's virtual reality and Neuralink, Elon Musk Neuralink, and these sort of really throwing open these possibilities of experience, both internally and collectively as well. So I'm interested in, and one of the, I think, in a way, a slight downside of this explosion of technology, certainly from a music point of view, because that's the discipline that I know best, is that it can make consumers and critics and musicians, everyone involved in it, it means that we become, I think there's a trend of obsession for innovation for innovation's sake. So everything has like, there's this always wanting newness, like, and sort of rejecting things that are on the one hand, we sort of reject familiarity and we always, that's not very interesting. When, like, on the other hand, Bach was such a genius and there's so much depth to his practices that we could, people could be still exploring his processes and finding new ways to apply his processes, maybe for hundreds of years. But, we've had several Bachs in the last 100 years, like Steve Reich and these people. And I wanted to ask you, Do you have a feeling in terms of lighting engineering and these possibilities? Are they? Do you think there's an element of people becoming sort of almost unrealistically hungry just for sort of new experience? And then also maybe there could be a trend going back the other way, wanting something that's really simple and really human, like we're saying. Like you always get these polar extremes. It's a bit like nowadays we have Spotify that has millions of songs on, and then also people are buying more vinyl, and vinyl is becoming popular as well. Like you get these sort of trends in both directions.
Yeah, it's a great topic, and you can go a lot of directions with this theme. And based on your introduction on this theme, I was thinking about a few things. Like, I think there is, and it needs to be separated. There's a few themes. Like, there is this need and this idea of thinking that everything consists out of algorithms, and algorithms can go so deep, so into details that people need to develop specialisms into a certain directions. And with developing these specialisms, you're managing better in working with tools and technologies. And I'm really from the perspective, I like to be a generalist. I don't like to go in a specialty. I mean, the demand in technology is that far now that you have to be very specific and very specialized in a certain skill to innovate and create new technologies to work with in general. And I think human evolution is going too slow at the moment for a kind of idea that we have as a human species. And I think technology and the development and the speed of it is the consequence for it. So in that sense, at the moment, I think we're speaking about technology as a tool. It's like a magic trick, you know, like as fire was invented, technology is invented. And so for experiencing things or artworks or installations or music performances, the new technological discoveries are great tools to experience new vibrations or new visualizations. But in a sense, they're as tools to experience, and I also realize that it will pass, you know, in the end, and it will go over, and people will always be in demand for further evolutions, you know, to create the new generation or to create the new Frankenstein monster, when you want to call it like that. I mean, in that sense, you can state, okay, we want to create our own death by bringing in new technologies, seeing them as our kids, our future, because we are not fast enough as humans. So there's nothing against the idea of embracing that and be humoristic about it, and use it till we drown in it. And why not? Let's celebrate it.
You're an optimist then.
Yeah, I mean that's how we tick apparently, and that's how we do things. And I think there is something stronger as the human itself. And I mean, I have to think a lot about the selfish gene, you know, in that sense. The gene decides what's needed to survive something in a way. So I think it's great to that technology is used in music and performing arts and whatever comes with it, to create awareness about it and to feel surprised. But for me personally, it's would be the same as if I would live in 1700 and a magician would bring a bunny out of a head, and I would be surprised.
Yeah, it's like not become. I suppose what you're saying in a way is not to become cynical, to always like have that wonder and that enjoyment and excitement about these new possibilities. And I suppose as well, like something I talked about before was, although we're sort of developing ever more complicated and sort of sophisticated and immersive technologies for whether it's creating music or ways of doing installation and projecting light and so on, like all of these different technologies, there's still these sort of essential human truths of experience that we're just developing new tools to experience these ancient realities. And also another point which has sort of dawned on me having been talking about this stuff on the podcast is that on the one hand, there are the sort of seismic shifts that happen like before the 20th century, say the invention of the piano. You do get these sort of landmarks, and in the 20th century we've had several landmarks, really tremendously powerful changing experiences and technologies. But actually also what's happening with packages like Ableton Live is not only is there like these massive game-changing shifts where it's a very radical shift, but there's also still, because it's a factor of something like, and I can only talk about what I know well, like I use Ableton Live and have used it for a long time since it was developed. And there's something about it as well where, because it's so powerful and so sophisticated and so user-friendly, and that you can have it on your laptop and you can work wherever you are, it also... It's not about the bold gestures, it's about the subtleties and the fact that because of the way it works, there's so much room for these sort of little details, like you've talked about in the performances, these like little details. There's, you know, it's like fingerprints. You can, every single musician who uses Ableton, like sometimes if you really know Ableton, you can hear music and you recognize effects or you recognize the hallmarks of the way it's used. But when you hear something like, you would never have made that if you were using the same Ableton setup and the same instruments even. Like there's so much scope for sort of your own personal character almost and personality to come through in your music making, because it's powerful but in a way that enables subtlety.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that. I mean, lighting also, programming lights is also working accordingly. If I see a show, I can see what software has been used, what kind of hardware has been used to make a live show happening. But it's because I'm very busy with it that I see the effects and everything. It's at these moments when I see actually accidents or distortions that I think, hey, that's interesting, because that's a chain of moments wherein something is different. So I try to capture these and implement them in the software. And I think because so much software is available and it's so easy to work with, I think it's very challenging for musicians these days to capture these, let's call it mistakes in their recordings to create that new sound. No, because everything is laid out.
In a way, but I do think there's often, when I'm using Ableton, there will be sort of happy accidents and you're like moving stuff around or the way you play with sound. And I think it also partly comes down to your attitude and your approach. I mean, almost every artist, I think every artist I've spoken to so far is sort of, we've talked about this element of the need for fun and play and exploration. And that, like, I've made my best music when I don't really feel like I'm working even. I'm just, like, I might be sat watching TV with my headphones on and just sort of, or sat at the kitchen or the dining table or on a train or in a hotel room. Like, I'm not, you know, sometimes it's fun to go into a high pressure, high stakes environment, like go into a professional studio and have to deliver on the day and so on. But there's also certainly a quality that comes out of the playful attitude and sort of playing. And I think Ableton is conducive to that, or it can be.
Yeah. So in that sense, technology and the playfulness that we have as humans, and also the complexity playfulness has apparently, is really something that still needs to go together. I think technology is not that advanced to be really playful. I mean, in that sense, when you speak about learning programs that learn something, there is always a repetition. It's not a reinvention, because I don't think technology can bring that playfulness by itself. You cannot program playfulness into a machine in that sense.
I don't know enough about artificial intelligence to talk about that. That's beyond my intellectual capabilities. But,
yeah. Well, most people, it is, thank God, still. But it's something to look at, and I think it will be developed, and automatization in performing arts is happening more and more, and it's a good thing it's happening. But I feel it back. I don't see it back, but I can feel it back, that there is this system, this matrix running around it, making it. And I think it's good that there are pieces like that, and there will become more pieces like that. But the playfulness is, when it comes to my idea of experiencing arts, the art itself. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I was. If it's okay, Nico, I was going to bring us to the end of the interview, and the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is. So I'm very grateful to you for these 2 music videos that you've made for me. So there was the one that we released in January for my track Mother's Day, which is available, which we released in January with the taken from my EP Nihilism is Pointless, which is out now on Faith and Industry Records. And then there's another video that you made for me for a track of mine called Mildenhall, which came from the Solo Collective Part 2 record, which I released a couple of years ago with Anna Muller and Alex Stolzer. And I wanted to ask you, and I need to actually confirm exactly, but hopefully by the time people are hearing this podcast, they'll be able to click straight through and see both videos. So I should have released Mildenhall onto my YouTube channel as well by the time this is available. So, but I mean, have you made many music videos before? And also, what was it like, the process for these 2 videos, and also compared to your work as someone who works on installation and live performance?
Well, as said before, I worked initially as a scenographer and light designer, and I started to embrace projection more and more, because I used it as a light source and to create abstractions of light on surfaces. So I started to work in live performance and theater pieces more and more with the idea of projections, and to bring light as a connecting point in it. And working with projections for me is really creating an extra layer about for a certain content or for a certain music piece. So it's not like creating a separated story, but it's adding and it's contributing something to the given content on stage itself. So it's creating an environment. And I realized that making music videos itself, so something that's specifically to seen on television or the internet, it's a whole story. So the content is in the screen, so you work in a different way with layers and depth. Like as with music, people know the concept of left and right, but the concept of depth and layers in depth in the front, above, below, and behind is also something I try to encourage in visualizations. And I think projections are a great tool to use for this. And as I mentioned before, like I try to get rid of the prime colors and work in abstractions. The same thing I try to do with forms and images. So the videos that I've been making for you, first of all, I think I offered myself for Mildenhall. I was fascinated by the track. And I wanted to do something with it. And I've been many times in former Yugoslavia, and I'm working and recording a lot of these Spomenik sculptures, which are monuments built by the partisans after the Second World War to celebrate and to honor the fallen soldiers. It's not only that, it's also these sculptures are there to help people and give people thoughts about being here and being somewhere else, and reality on itself. So the forms are always in relating to natural forms, and they're human abstractions, and I feel very connected to these sculptures. And so I've been working with these sculptures in different layers to visualize the deeper layers in that track, more or less. And that was nice to do. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's beautiful. Thank you. And is there anything else specific about Mother's Day? You never told me before actually where the footage came from or what the images were, which is kind of interesting as well. But so what was Mother's Day actually based on? Where was that image from? Or the
that's a sculpture in a park in Zagreb, and it's made out of copper, and it represents actually. It's quite intense, but people were hanged in that park, soldiers, and they represent the journey to heaven, actually, to the next state of being and finding peace. So you see also on the elements they're floating, but there is this upward form of hope and transcendence and letting go of what has been experienced and accept peace as it is. I mean, you don't see concrete hanging people in that sculpture. They're all associations, and you can really see in these things what you want to see. And that's the strength about these monuments. They are very, very open for own interpretation. And I think in a lot of music I hear at the moment, I can relate to parts of these monuments. I mean, I really zoom into the monuments. I can really go into detail, but I can really study each monument for hours. And they're all over. And a lot of them are also destroyed by now because they're associated with the Serbs who initially installed them. So they're all disappearing also. But in every village where you pass by somewhere behind the cafe, you still see them, and most of them are half destroyed. But they reveal a time in history where people who meant well and did something out of a good intention, how evil it was or how bad they suffered, they stood for something, and they died. And they're very futuristic also, and they really have this otherworldly feeling to it. And there are thousands to be found, and they all have a different purpose and a different story.
Wow. I mean, it's fascinating because, of course, nihilism is pointless there's a few different themes, and I talked about it in detail on the last podcast, but there is a an overlying sort of conceptual narrative to it about preparedness for dying. And that's sort of fascinating that you somehow subconsciously picked up on that.
Yeah.
It's very good. We obviously spent enough time together now. No, and thank you very much. Thank you for the beautiful videos, and thank you for taking the time to talk to me. And I really hope
it was a pleasure.
Yeah, enjoy this. And if people want to find out more about your work and look you up, what's the best website? What's the address? Where can they find you?
I created once a foundation because I thought when I was in Kosovo, it's good to have a kind of, I saw UN and UNPROFOR, UNHCR, and I thought, you know what, I'm also going to make a foundation. So I created the Scenographical Infrastructure Development Foundation. And so sidf.eu is a website, a bit outdated, but you can have a look there and you see some past works and you can see the palette of things, because it's kind of a lot of different things, I must say, by now, and different styles. So I need to work on the idea of, because, websites are always used as a kind of, what do you do and how do things look? But I need to find a new concept of how to present my work, I have the feeling, because some clients, like I was doing more and more in America for also with Kim Kardashian and stuff for her fashion show, and I realized, like, does that fit with alternative music performances that I do, or does it fit with development programs that I like to do in South Africa and Namibia? So I need to see how to separate it, but you gotta get a glimpse there and find out more. Yeah.
Well, we'll include that link in the information box underneath the YouTube video.
Yeah,
so
great.
It's sidf.au.
Exactly. Yeah, that's correct.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Nico. And you're out in the Netherlands, right? You're based in Netherlands.
Yes. Yeah. Still am. Yeah.
Good. And well, hopefully see you before too long. I think we're going to be working together at some point.
Yes, I'm looking forward.
Yeah. Prehension Blooms with Neon Dance. And we'll speak again soon. And maybe in a year or two when you've done some new projects and so on, we can catch up again and bring you back in. That'd be great.
That would be wonderful. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Pleasure, anytime. And take care, and we'll speak again soon, yeah?